first person that comes to mind to sell merchandise tied to an artist or a group has to be Elvis Presley's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who in 1956, love him or hate him, created a style of management that in my eyes set the standard for future managers of the 1960s and the 70s to try and emulate, whether it was Brian Epstein managing the Beatles, Andrew Loog Oldham managing the Rolling Stones, Don Arden with the Small Faces, Michael Jeffries with the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and of course Led Zeppelin's Peter Grant and the Sex Pistols' Malcolm McLaren. The Colonel had a great idea. By selling merchandising together with the movies would make Elvis Presley more popular overseas that he didn't even have to tour outside of America at all. And that, in my eyes, is absolutely unbelievable, especially from a business point of view. It wouldn't be until the Beatles achieved worldwide success in 1964 that merchandising and movies tied to a solo artist or a group would have the same popularity as the King of Rock and Roll did 8 years earlier. But what people might be surprised to learn is the Rolling Stones manager, the then 19-year-old Andrew Loog Oldham, seen here on the left of this photograph, sitting alongside the Rolling Stones co-manager Eric Easton, tried to do the exact same thing for a brief period for the Stones. I want to show you some of the 60s merchandise that was available at the time. The first of these items became available through the Rolling Stones fan club, which was first set up by Andrew Loog Oldham to help promote the Rolling Stones' debut single, Come On, which was released in the UK on the 7th of June 1963. As you can see here, the first items that were available in the Rolling Stones fan club pack was a button badge and a signed postcard photo signed by the band. But I must stress, these particular set of autographs signed on the back of the postcard have been rubber stamped, or in other words, for all you young people watching, have been photocopied. Let me try and explain, but I don't want to dwell on autographs for too long on this video. You see, part of the problem was, it all depended when you applied to become a member of the Rolling Stones fan club. Let's just say if you applied between June of 1963 to say January of 1964, the chances of you receiving a genuine set of autographs signed by the band were quite high. But as the band became more popular, and in particular in 1964, it became very difficult to sign for every member of the fan club. I mean, you only had to look at the enrolment number. I mean, in this particular one, you got what? 8,207. Date of enrolment, August 64. By that time, yeah, the Stones were huge, particularly in the UK, with their debut album, which was released April the 17th, 1964, which went straight to number one in the UK album charts. Also, they had their first number one hit single, It's All Over Now, in the UK, which was released on the 26th of June 1964. And with their second EP, 5x5, released in the UK on the 14th of August 1964, and also went straight to number one. What I'm saying is, if you're thinking of purchasing original Rolling Stones autographs, particularly from the Brian Jones era, be very careful, because they had a lot of people working for them. And if you were very lucky and got to the stage door, the roadie would stop you and say, if you wanted an autograph, give us your autograph book or your program or whatever you had on you at the time. And then he would go in, and the poor old fan's probably standing there thinking, finally, I'm getting my stuff signed. When in actual fact, the roadie is signing it himself. And the poor old fan's probably thinking, yeah, I've got a genuine autograph. But you got to think to yourself, there must have been hundreds of fans, if not thousands of fans, waiting outside wanting exactly the same thing. So, I'm going to say this again. Be careful buying autographs. They were even forging them back in the 60s. Still, it's a nice item to have in my collection. After the success of the Beatles monthly books, which had an original run of 77 issues between August of 1963 till December of 1969, the Rolling Stones monthly book was first published 10 months later on June the 1st, 1964, but only lasted for 30 issues, with the last one being published November 1966. All 5 of the Rolling Stones took it in turns to edit an issue of the book every month. These books here in my collection are in very good condition, especially for their age, and are getting very hard to find in tip-top condition nowadays, especially Book 1 and Book 30. Before I forget, there are these special binders for Beatles and Rolling Stones monthly books, available for purchase, even though they look nice on the bookshelf. I'm telling you now, they ain't the best way to preserve your books, as I found out to my cost. They will damage the spines of your book in time, but fortunately, they only damaged 2 of my books, and they were the issues that were very common, so they weren't too hard to replace. The best way of storing them, I find, are using comic book backing boards and bags, but the best comic book bags I use are my lights. They cost a bit, but they are worth it in the long run. The Rolling Stones Bubblegum cards were released between 1964 and 65. 2 sets of cards were sold to kids over a 2-year period. The complete collection of cards consists of 40 colour photographs of the Rolling Stones during world tours and rehearsals, and some of them taken by members of the Rolling Stones themselves. Some of the cards are quite easy to find still, and quite reasonably priced, but condition is always the key, and to find them in a complete collection like this is now getting very hard to find. In fact, Bill Wyman has a beautiful display of these cards in his Sticky Fingers restaurant in London. A Pixarama fold-out book of the Rolling Stones was released early in 1964, but unlike the Beatles, who I think had 2 or 3 versions of these pocket-sized books, the Rolling Stones only had one. But don't let that put you off. They're fairly common to find and quite reasonably priced. So, if you want to start collecting items from the 60s, whoever it may be, from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones, you can't go wrong with these pocket-sized fold-out books, which would be great to start you off, either for investment or just for the pleasure. Around 1964, the Rolling Stones published their first autobiography, called Our Own Story by the Rolling Stones, as we told it to Peter Goodman. Published in the UK by Corgi Books, and covers the first 2 years of the Rolling Stones' career. The book was also published in the USA, only this time by Bantman Books, with a slightly different cover. And also on the top left of the cover it says, "Kinky man, kinky. Direct from England, the only official account with 32 pages of original photographs," when in truth there was nothing kinky in it at all. In fact, there were more photographs than actual text in the book. This next item I was very kindly given to by a friend of mine who owned a second-hand record shop in the 80s right up to the early 2000s, and he was called David Saunders. And David, I hope you're still around, and I hope you're doing well, mate. To cut a long story short, he gave me this beautiful Irish linen cloth poster of the Rolling Stones, made in 1964. I don't really know much about this poster, other than in the bottom middle it says Ulster, and I don't really know how much it's worth, because I haven't seen this item up for sale anywhere. Anyway, I don't think I'm ever going to sell it anyway. These 5 Rolling Stones jewellery brooches were released in the UK between 1964 and 1965. Selcol toys are probably more famous for manufacturing toy musical instruments for people like Elvis Presley and the Beatles. But what people may not realise is they also produce these 4 very beautiful and very hard to find toy guitars for the Rolling Stones. One thing that catches my eye about these items from the 1960s is the wonderful artwork on the packaging and on the toys themselves. If anybody seems to know who was responsible for the illustrations on the packaging and on the toys themselves, I would love to know, because they seem to be original drawings rather than copied from original photographs, if you see what I mean. Because if you look at the one on the far left, the one that says Rolling Stones Party Pack with the harmonica and the kazoo, if you look carefully you can see where the artist has drawn a picture of Brian Jones playing the kazoo. The reason I mention this is when you think about it, when you see with this party pack it's got a harmonica, and of course Brian Jones is well famous for playing the harmonica, and Selcol as a toy manufacturer added the kazoo just to make more money back in 1964. But I can't help thinking that Brian Jones would end up playing, of all the instruments he could have played, the kazoo on a track called Cool Calm Collected, which ended up being on the Rolling Stones album Between the Buttons, which was released in the UK on the 20th of January 1967 and in the US on the 11th of February 1967. Let's get back to talking about these Selcol toy guitars. Now, unfortunately, I don't own any of the 3 guitars on the left, but I did own the one on the right. And if you want to see the guitar in the middle of this photograph, Bill Wyman has one displayed without the packaging in his Sticky Fingers restaurant in Kensington, London. Going back to what I said before, the guitar I did own was called the Big Six acoustic guitar. Just to show you the size of the guitar, here's a promotional photograph where you can see Brian Jones playing with the guitar along with Charlie Watts playing with a toy drum. Now, I don't know whether Selcol as a toy manufacturer ever released a toy drum connected with the Rolling Stones, or whether this was just for promotional purposes only. Fortunately, before I sold the guitar, I managed to take some photographs. Here's some close-up images. It's quite nice to see the autographs printed on the guitar. And for a toy, it looked great displayed in my house for years. But what I particularly like is the illustration art of the Rolling Stones, seen here framed in the shape of a guitar pick. There were 2 Rolling Stones jigsaw puzzles released by Best Time Productions in the UK between 1964 and 1965. The first of these puzzles that I picked up show the Rolling Stones performing in front of an audience, and I've got to say, I love the art. Whoever was responsible for the illustration on this was an absolute genius in my eyes. The second of these jigsaw puzzles that were available show the Rolling Stones coming off an aeroplane after a world tour. This extremely rare Rolling Stones pencil case was released in the UK in 1965, and for its age, to be fair, it looks in really good condition. In 1964, the American toy company Ideal released these Rolling Stones Crazy Play Pal dolls, and to tell you the truth, they're really ugly. I mean, if we take a close look at the Brian Jones figure, it looks more like Andy Warhol than Brian Jones. The Rolling Stones fan club was launched, I think, just before their second tour, and by the look of their magazine, it looks a lot better than the one we had in the UK. I love what it says on the back of the magazine. Scruffy, shaggy, scraggly haired. Absolutely, man. We're not rebels, we just like it that way. And of course, you get an official fan club card and a couple of stickers, which look quite cool actually. Rolling Stones World Travel Bag seemed to be only available to fans who saw them in New York. If anybody that has seen these bags on sale during the first and second tours in any other state apart from New York? Can you please let me know? 'Cause it would be very interesting. Well, at least for me. And finally, these very colourful Rolling Stones flag pennants were sold during the Stones' first and second tour of America in 1964.